Okay, shall we go ahead and call this meeting to order?
Think we should take just a quick roll of the members who are here. It's like Senator Beard,
Here?
Senator Flowers,
Here.
Senator Cuff,
Here.
Randy,
Here.
and Nancy.
Yeah. Here.
And I know Gordy and Paul both reached out to me and said they were unable to attend. They had last minute things that came up. And when I talked to Commissioner Chilcott a month ago, he said he was gonna be able to make it, but I didn't hear back from him or Representative Marler.
There was an email from him this morning that he was going to Zoom in.
From,
I assume bitter.
okay. So yeah, I guess if he might join us a little later, but probably get started.
Okay, well, Bryce, thank you for that roll call. Let's see. I'm gonna just go ahead and before we get started on the housekeeping issues, do we need to maybe look at nominations for the chairperson of this advisory council?
If we do, I'll open nominations. Becky Beer.
Wow,
We have a second.
okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Okay, it looks like I'm it. I'm your Daisy.
Stuck with you again.
All right, before we get started, I just want to go ahead and read the agenda for today. And first of all, I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but I will be if we meet again. The agenda for today is the 2025-26 reappraisal stumpage values. The next item, reappraisal changes summary. Third item, forest zone assignment review. Item 4, administrative rule annual changes review. Item 5, forest committee term review. That's kind of a leftover item from our last meeting, last interim. Let's see. Item 6, forest land taxation advisory committee group discussion. Item 7, public comment. And then before we adjourn, we'll go ahead and establish whether or not we need to have a follow-up meeting. So with that, and unless anybody has anything else to add, we'll go ahead with the upcoming reappraisal stumpage values. I believe that's Dylan Cole and Jared Isom.
All right, yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Chair Beard. Yeah, I'm Jared Isom with the Tax Policy and Research Division here at the Department of Revenue. I'm just gonna go through the Montana Forest Lands Valuation Report that Dylan and I put together. Should be a review for probably most of you. You were all mostly part of the committee when we put together the model. So this report just goes through the model and contains the stumpage values for the next reappraisal cycle based on the updated model. So quick introduction there. You can see the new stumpage values for each zone are bold at the bottom of the introduction paragraph and through how those came to be.
Hey, Jared.
Yes.
Excuse me. Can you share the screen?
Oh, great.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, Bryce is working on it. It looks like it's shared, I guess. Not yet.
Oh, there we
All
go.
There we are. Okay. So the data that we get comes from the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation because it's the best publicly available data we have of timber sales that we can use to estimate these stumpage values for each zone. If you go to page 3, it has a map of the zones that we use for these valuations, and each zone is assigned a different stumpage value. And then there's a table there that shows where each sale administered by the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation took place. As you can imagine, the Northwest and the Southwest zones have the most sales, and the East zone has only 6 sales in the last 10 years, and there were 3 in 2017 and 3 in 2018, and that's kind of the main reason we have to go through this regression model process, is we can't just use simple averages of what these stumpage values are. So that's the thinking behind the regression value, and this is also the amount of data points we have to create this model. So again, it's concentrated in the southwest and the northwest zones, and then we use all these sales to assign stumpage values to each zone. If you go to page
Hold on
4,
one sec.
oh, sorry.
It's like Scott and Commissioner Chilcott are in a different meeting somehow.
Okay, should we wait for that for a little bit then?
I think we should.
Bill, could you send Scott and Commissioner Chilcott the Zoom link?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Scott Mendenhall.
Yes.
Okay.
Don't we have any elevator music for times like these?
Uh, Senator Beard, it's Mike.
Yes, yes, Senator.
And, we have public comment down at item 7. I know we have at least one member of the public in the room who, I think is representative of the land.
Montana Forest Owners Association.
Montana Forest Owners Association. And it might be reasonable to allow a bit of public comment, as we go item by item, rather than it getting clear through it and then coming back and having to refresh. I don't know, I haven't talked to him about it, but that's just a potential suggestion.
I think I'm agreeable to that. Keep items topical before we progress to the next one.
Yeah, thank you. Unless it gets too belligerent.
Right? Good point, Senator Cuff.
No.
You care if I take that poster off the wall?
I mean, I personally wouldn't care, but I'm sure somebody would.
I bet they wouldn't.
Maybe not, I don't know.
That's cool
It is.
though. Cleaner line than ice ski.
Yeah. No.
Now I might be a rolling snowball.
I never got into this.
Well, we've got a deputy director on, so I'm just waiting for Commissioner Chilcott.
Hello, Scott.
Hello. I clicked on join the meeting and it was just Greg and I sitting there looking at each other, and I'm a little slow, but I thought this isn't right. So
Well, we're glad you could make it. I thought you slept in.
I wish that was the case, but I apologize for. not getting connected right. So,
I have a question about Gordy and Paul, even though they aren't here, did they provide any comments to the agenda, or is that something that?
Yeah, I both had a conversation with both of them and they were gonna look over the materials. And then I'll get back in touch with them and see if they had any additional comment.
Okay, but you don't have that now.
No, they didn't provide me anything in advance.
There it is.
Okay,
Welcome, Commissioner Chilcott.
Are we ready now? Shall I continue?
Please do.
Okay. All right, I'll move on to page 4 now. We're in the middle of the Montana Forest Lands Valuation Report, for those that just joined us. It's going through where our data comes from, and now we're gonna get into the methodology and the actual model. So page 4, a few lines down, has a somewhat complicated looking formula, which is just the regression formula that we use and all the variables that go into helping us determine and estimate these stumpage values. They're kind of broken out into 3 different categories. We have the zones, northwest, southwest, central and east zone, because each zone is gonna have a different characteristics that change the stumpage value of those areas. That make them different from each other. The second category is an index that we use. We get the index from the Bureau of Business and Economic Research at the University of Montana. They survey mills around the state, and those mills let them know what the delivered log prices are that we can then use to estimate the stumpage value of the timber that those logs come from. And then the final category, which is the majority of the variables, is just stump to mill costs of logging, which will decrease the value of those timber sales and stumpage value. So those are all of the basics of the regression model that we use, and we get all of the information from the DNRC. Those sales include all that stump to mill variables, and then we add the index and the zone to that to run the regression and come up with these estimates for each zone. So on page 5, there's a little chart there, that the graph that has the species breakdown of each zone. Eastern zone is obviously a lot different than the other zones in Montana. A little bit lower values, mostly ponderosa pine. The other ones, majority western large Douglas fir, and then there's also a lot of whitewood in the northwestern zone, which is higher value. So just another way to differentiate the zones, and the index also comes into play to determine how those different species affect the stumpage value. We go on to the next page. Page 6 has the regression results. So it has just a summary of how each variable affects the stumpage value in each in the regression model. We can go more into detail on that if you want to. But the bottom line is the model predicts about 65% of the variation in stumpage values, which we believe is decent considering all the many variables that go into the valuation of stumpage value. Again, with the limited data we have from the DNRC, we feel like that's a pretty good fit and a pretty good model to estimate these stumpage values. And then page 7, the final page, has the 10 years of values that we use. Yeah, scroll over now. And we use an Olympic average, so we drop the highest and the lowest. The green is the highest, and the red highlighted is the lowest value in each zone. So the 8 other values in each zone are averaged over the last 10 years to come up with the Olympic average stumpage value that we use in our equation as we value the productive capacity of forest land. And that is the model. Those are the new values for the 2025-2026 reappraisal cycle. And yeah, if you have any questions, I will answer them. That's all I have. Dylan, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's pretty good. The subject values are maybe a little bit out of context in terms of what that means for property values, but the next section gets into that, so.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you tell me how those compare to the last period?
That is what the next agenda item will do. I think.
So yeah, maybe a little recap
Sure.
briefly from this committee's extensive work in the prior interim where we basically the committee decided to make some of these changes. So one thing to keep in mind when we get into the next section is the comparison is from the old reappraisal cycle, which was using the old methodology that Dr. Jackson used. After those meetings last interim, this committee decided to adopt TPR performing a calculation, and they had made some alterations, modifications to Dr. Jackson's calculations. So maybe if you guys could just kind of explain what that difference in methodology is.
Sure.
Because we will want to keep that in mind in the next section is the numbers that are getting compared are Dr. Jackson's. They're not what TPR calculated and presented to you all during the last interim. So it can get a little confusing, I think. So if they could just give a little explanation of your methodology. And then with those DNRC sales, if y'all remember from that interim work, we explored trying to incorporate Forest Service related sales or private sales. And there just wasn't a reliable data source to get that information and incorporate it into the model. So that's kind of just the high level recap of how we got to where we are today based on your all's work in the past interim and the agreement to have TPR start performing this calculation, and then just those modifications to the formula that was used from what Dr. Jackson used to do to what TPR did. And if you remember, right, that resulted in lower stumpage values once TPR made those adjustments to the model than what Dr. Jackson's model predicted.
What's TPR?
Tax policy and research, sorry. We get a little acronym here.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so
I
that's
see
still,
Senator Flowers has his hand up.
Thank you, Senator Beard. First question I have is just how does the R squared compare on this model to the last model?
yeah, that's a
Better,
good-
worse, about the same?
It is about the same. It's maybe what 0.02 less than the last model. So we felt like it was still a good fit, maybe just a little bit worse, but not significantly. So yeah, that's a good
Okay.
question. But the model still holds
Thanks.
up the same as it did last meeting.
Okay,
Um,
one follow-up question if I could, Senator
Mhm.
Beard.
Follow up?
Yep. My next question is just, this is really the first cycle since you, TPR, I guess is the right acronym, has taken over this responsibility without a contractor. And I'm just curious how you feel it went and whether this approach, you're still confident that this approach of having the work being conducted by TPR rather than a contractor is still the right path.
Yeah, Senator Flowers, Chair Beard, yeah, we still feel as confident as we did when the whole group was meeting regularly and you were helping us, figure out where the best data comes from, and we were working with the whole committee to put together the model. I mean, it really didn't change at all in the last couple of years since we went through that process, and we still feel pretty good, especially because, yeah, the model held up just about as well as it did the first time around. And we haven't really made any changes, and we still feel really good about it.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
We want to go through some of the changes between.
Yeah, I think it
differences
might
right now.
not hurt, just
Sure.
a high level
Yeah.
recap of kind of the difference between Dr.
Yeah.
Jackson's model and what you guys
Sure thing.
are doing.
Yeah, so Dr. Jackson also used a regression model. Well, it's a lot of our models quite similar to his. The zones are exactly the same as what happened in his model. We, as Tax Policy and Research Division, the Department of Revenue, don't feel like we know enough, and we don't want it to be our responsibility to change these zones. If the Forest Lands Taxation Advisory Committee feels that these zones need to be changed, then you can do that and we will change the zones in our model, but the zones are unchanged from 2021 to now. So you can change it if you want to, but that's all the same. The biggest difference in the model is the index that was used. Can't actually remember what the index is called that Dr. Jackson used in his analysis, but we completely changed to the the Bureau of Business and Economic Research. That wasn't used at all in the previous model. Dr. Jackson's index was a statewide index, so the same applied to East as the West. And we felt that the BBER index, we can customize it to each individual sale based on the species and the zone that it's in. So we feel like it's a little bit more accurate estimate of what each individual sale in each individual zone can produce. And then, the third category of variables in the regression, the stump to mill. Dr. Jackson had a lot of those as well, and a lot of the same ones. We simplified them a little bit and just made it a little more transparent, and that's the difference there. That probably, there was some changes to that, but the biggest changes is in the index that was used, and that's the main difference between our model and Dr. Jackson's model. And that's the source of a lot of the differences that you'll see in the next agenda item between 2021, 2025 appraisals.
And I would note on our website, on the Forest Land Taxation Advisory Committee landing page, if you go to our homepage, you'll see a committee's link along the top, and within that link, you'll see a link for this particular committee. All of the material that was presented in all of those extensive meetings in the last interim, all of the recording of those meetings, that is still all out there on the website. So if you wanted to refresh yourself on any of that documentation, it's all still out there, publicly available. We can send you that link. Again, if you wanted to compare what Dr. Jackson had prepared in the past to what our tax policy and research is doing now, all of that stuff is still out there and available.
Yeah, I guess I'll chime in that, our values now as compared to 2 years ago when we first came up with this model are almost exactly the same in the Northwest, maybe 10% lower in Southwest, 6 or 7% higher in the Central Zone, and 10% lower in the East Zone. So part of that is the switch from the 10-year average to the Olympic average. But you can see that there really wasn't much movement in the 2-year reappraisal. And then like I mentioned earlier, the next section will kind of compare 2021 to 2025, and you can see that there's significantly lower values in all the zones except the East Zone is slightly higher than Dr. Jackson had come up with in 2021.
Okay, if there's no further questions on just this stumpage value report, Senator Beard, did you want to allow for public comment now on that particular section?
Why don't we go ahead and do that? Ask for public comment, anyone?
Nothing in
Seeing
the
no
room?
hands? No hands are raised, so I think we can go on to the next item.
Okay. I will turn this one over to Amanda for kind of a comparison of what last cycle looked like compared to what we'll be looking at for this cycle.
Good morning, members of the committee, Chair Beard. Good morning. What you have is an overview to show the comparison costs and values within the 4 zones between the appraisal year of 21 and 25. At the top of the page, you'll see the forest cost calculation breakdown for each zone. So we take the 10-year expense per acre, and we add it to the assessment fee. And that's again a 10-year average fee per acre, and we add that to the severance tax, which has been renamed to education fee. And then add the slash disposal fee, and you can see where the total costs were sitting in 2021. And then right below that, you will see the total cost using the same formula for the upcoming 2025. If, again, these are using the zones as they were set in 2021, so the zones haven't changed in any of these calculations. But you can see to the right, the total costs, the fluctuations is not a huge change from last year to this upcoming cycle using the same zones. $14.22 for zone 1, $11.09 for zone 2, $3.95 for zone 3, and $2.48 in zone 4. So zone 4 saw the most change, and it went up.
And again, these are all coming from DNRC.
Yeah, so the numbers that we get, the information, the forest expenses and the fire assessment fees and the education fees and slash disposal fees all come from the DNRC forest and fire division. So these numbers are all from their reports that I received. And then on the,
So,
okay, go ahead.
I'm just wondering on the, do we know what kind of dropped it a little bit? On some of the, well, like zone 1,
Mhm.
went from 1489 to 1422. I
Yeah.
can't look back and forth fast enough.
Yep, so the difference is if you look at the forest management expenses for zone 1, for example.
Yeah.
It was an average of $13.84 in 2021. And then according to their numbers for 2025, those expenses have decreased down to $12.97. And then the fire assessment fees actually went up. So the fire assessment fee went from $1.02 to $1.03, and this is all again per acre on that 10-year average. And then the education fee went up from 0.01 to went down from 0.01 down to 0.004. So that fee.
0.
Yeah, so that fee went down. And then the slash disposal fee actually went up from 2 cents or 0.02 to 0.018. So it also went down a little
So
bit.
what? If I might ask, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, I mean, I know it's not a big change, but the 1 cent to 0.004, is that's the way to read it?
And so I'm not 100% positive, but I think those two columns in particular are probably rounding between
Mhm.
how we displayed the information with the previous person who calculated it and put this together versus how we're displaying it now. So I think those are probably actually unchanged. We just rounded up to a cent in the 2021 cycle, and for the 2025 table, we're displaying it as it actually is.
Okay, and an understanding of why we changed from severance tax to education fee.
I actually reached out to the DNRC regarding that, and they haven't used the verbiage severance tax in years. So I was advised that it's actually supposed to be an education fee.
Okay.
So that's why the verbiage changed.
So we're just playing a little catch up here. Thank you.
I'm good, thank you.
The next column is our agricultural income comparison. So we derive that by, let me pull it all calculator here. So we get these numbers, we take the grazing fee and we compare that to the the average grazing productivity that would sit under the forestry if that was a thing. So we have GIS for our productivity if the land was grazing sitting under the forestry. And so these numbers they are essentially, we calculate the net ag income for each forest zone. And that's what that column is what you're looking at. So for zone 1 in 2021, the net ag income for that zone was 95 cents, and now it's up to $1.13. Which those numbers will play some important roles, like they play important roles further when we calculate the forest calculations. So it's just one step in our calculation, and I wanted to show you, this is what the calculation we used in 95, and now it's actually has increased since 2021.
And that's probably primarily the result of just increased commodity prices and what
Right,
that
so
is.
our commodity price in 2021 for the grazing land is scheduled to be a little higher than it was in 2021. And so having said that, when we take that increase, the upcoming increase for our next reappraisal and compare it back to the productivity that's sitting there, obviously the dollar amount is going to increase also against those commodity prices. And then the next set of columns that we're gonna look at is the forest land productivity value per zone. And I broke these down again from 2021, comparing to the upcoming 2025 as the zones sit today. So as you can see for zone 1 for 2021, excuse me, the productivity value was $786.73. And it is as if the zones remain the same for 2021 or 2025, excuse me, zone 1, the productivity value looks to be going down to $634.38. Zone 2 for 2021, we were at $638.43. And that appears to be going down to $343.42 for 2025.
So this is comparing two charts.
Yeah, so the top one is for the 2021 reappraisal cycle.
Yeah.
And then 2025 is the upcoming cycle. And again, the 2021 is the zones that were set by Dr. Jackson, and then the 2025 are zones, these are as if the zones were not going to change. If you guys do determine the zones are gonna change, then that will also change our calculations a little bit.
What is the average productivity? I mean, what's the measure?
That's the average productivity,
Is that
in that
4 feet
entire,
or tons or
it's 4 feet,
4 feet?
yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Based on this 4 feet stuff you've got. I'm
Yep.
just a little bit slow.
No, yeah, so it's
But I like
average
to-
productivity, so that's in our board fee,
Yeah.
and then then we have the stumpage value. We have the gross income, the net ag income, gross income plus the net ag income. Then we have to put in the forest cost to create the net income and then our cap rate.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Yeah, so these tables are just essentially showing you every variable that
Yeah,
goes into the
yeah, and I like-
calculation and how each of those variable has changed between 2021 and
It
2020.
takes me back a few years. I've got to think hard sometimes.
Zone 3 for 2021 was $437.81 productivity value. And zone 3 for 2025 is $318.06. Zone 4 in 2021 is $52.92. And zone 4 for 2025 is $67.64. Then the last table on this page is the forest land aggregate value comparison. So what we did here is, these are side-by-side comparisons of 2021's total value versus the 2025, what the 2025 value will be. So our total values for zone one, was 953,344,407. Our total value for zone one for 2025, we are looking at 734,131,814.
And that's driven primarily by the number of acres.
Exactly, yeah, so we take our average productivity, per acre. And then we have to put that to the average productivity value that was created, and then we put that against the total acres that we have in that zone. Yep. And as you can see, the acres in each zone have differed between 21 and 25, which it looks like the greatest one that changed was zone 2. It went from 911,429 acres down to 725,635 acres. And I believe that was the cause of a statewide cleanup that we had of moving some forest property into a tribal, I believe, if I'm correct, that's what I was told by Mark. So,
So I see that we have Senator Flowers' hand up. Senator?
Thank you, Senator Beard. I think maybe you were starting to answer my question there, and that is just an explanation for why the big change in acreage. I assume in general that should remain pretty static, shouldn't it?
it would remain static unless there's been some big changes in what is taxable taxable timber versus non-taxable timber. And from my understanding, we had a cleanup that was pushed through that did make some pretty serious adjustments to the timber acres.
What does cleanup mean?
It's
Because that's it was 186,000 acres in zone 2, which is huge.
right,
And it looks like zone 2 encompasses some of the south end of the reservation in Lake and Missoula counties, and some of those may have been on as taxable forest land and should have been tribal exempt
Correct.
land.
yeah,
And so that's where some of that change could have occurred.
Could you follow up and I guess provide us a kind of more detailed explanation on both of these acreage changes, because they are substantial and affect the total value? Also, I want to make sure I understand what total value represents. Could you explain that?
so, yeah, the total value is if we take the average productivity per acre against the average productivity value to how many acres are in that forest zone, that is the projected, assessed value for that zone.
Okay, thank you. Could you then translate that to what revenue collections will be from forest tax in 25 compared to 21?
The projections?
Yeah, I mean, we can simply take what the tax rate was multiplied by that total market value versus what the tax rate will be set to go to. And if you remember from, again, the work that was done in the past interim, the bridge piece of legislation from when we went to the old reappraisal to the new 2-year reappraisal starting in 2025 with a change in methodology that results in this lower stumpage value and lower total values, whether we temporarily reduced that class 10 tax rate for these past 2 years, both 2023 and 2024. And then if no further changes were made, that tax rate is set to increase back up to 0.37% in the 2025 reappraisal. And again, that's, I guess, something this committee can consider and debate and offer a recommendation to, is if again, there's interest in adjusting that tax rate to a taxable neutral, as was done in the past 2 sessions, essentially.
Senator Flowers, did
So-
you have any further?
Just to follow up, so you'll get back to us with those numbers and also a more detailed explanation on why the acreage changed in zone 1 and zone 2.
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question? There's a huge difference in zone 2 between 21 and 25.
Mhm.
I'd like to understand that better.
Yeah, that's, we were just touching on that. So there, as Robin was saying earlier, there was some, property that was in taxable forest acres that got moved into non-taxable acres because they were privately owned.
So it's related to the same.
Yep,
Or are you
Yes.
referring to the productivity value went from 638 down to 343? Is that what you're asking?
okay. So the productivity value is, excuse me. So if on zone 2,
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a major function of the stumpage value difference between our model and Jackson. The biggest difference was in the southwest zone, which is the zone 2. That's Missoula County, Lake County, I better not listen.
River Valley.
Yeah, but, so it's a combination of both. There was a decrease in the number of acres, a fairly substantial decrease in the number of acres, and then also the productivity value was dropped by almost half. So those kind of combine to cause the largest difference is in that, so. So to Senator Flowers' question, it depends if we take, so if you remember right, we adjusted the tax rate to keep the new reappraisal revenue neutral. Because Dr. Jackson's numbers resulted in much higher values than before. So if we take and also remember, as part of the 6-year cycle, we were phasing in the increase. So the value was increasing, and at the same time, we were dropping the tax rate to keep the taxable value revenue neutral. If we took the fully phased in values from 2021 times the lower taxable value to keep it revenue neutral, which I think I didn't actually do that. The total taxable value would be about 5.7 million. And the value of this forest land as it stands right now at the 0.0037 taxable value, which was the taxable value prior to the 2021 reappraisal, is 5.3 million. So this forest land is looking at a lower total taxable value now than it would be under Dr. Jackson's model with the lower tax rate. Does that make sense?
What would the tax rate need to be to remain revenue neutral?
This is kind of back of the envelope, so take it with a bit of a grain of salt. Looks like the tax rate, we need to go to 0.004 instead of 0.0037.
Anything else on this report, Amanda, you want to touch on?
yep, I'm just making sure on this. The forest land aggregate value comparison, when we were looking at that, I just wanted to run through the rest of the numbers really quick is. Our total value for zone 2 is again gonna be lower. It's 581,883,777 for the 2021. And it is set to be 249,197,572. Again, that has some to do with the lower stumpage value and the big change in the overall acres, which again, I will follow up with a more detailed explanation of why the acres changed so drastically in zone 2. And then going into zone 3, our total value is 570,107,821 for the 2021, and it is set to go to 432,631,891. And then zone 4 is 23,544,253, and it is set to go to a total value of 29,935,908. And then on the last page, you can actually, it shows the forest land value by zone in the percentage change. So it can show you, and there's a graph that shows it to you also. So you can see, we provided the 2015, 2021, and then 2025 total values. And the percent changes between 2025 and 2021. This is just to represent, so you can see we were the 2 6-year cycle value, total values, and then now moving into a 2-year value, or the 2-year cycle total values, to show you the percent change between the 2 year, or between the 2 cycles.
Again, I think what we just kind of wanted to try to illustrate there is, there was that large increase from 2015 to the 2021 reappraisal that, prompted a lot of your guys' work in that interim. So this is just kind of showing you that all the various changes that were made, the change in the methodology with tax policy and research, and all the other changes have got us back closer to where those 2015 numbers were and mitigated that huge jump we saw between the 2015 and 2020 reappraisal cycles, which was, again, the primary reason why this committee has put in a lot of work over the last 2 interim sessions.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Senator Cuff.
yeah, I just want to say thank you to these people. When I was running the mills, I hated this kind of stuff, and I still do. But it's really important. And the explanations, I'm sure to you guys, they're kind of simple Simon stuff, but I have to work hard at it a couple of times to get it soak in. But it's coming. I appreciate it very much. I think you'll have to do it some more. And especially, I miss not having our 2 mill people here with us. I think that's almost gonna need a start over. They'll probably pick it up quicker, but this is good explanations. It also is gonna be even harder, as if other people become interested, which there certainly was interest as this went through. This was not an easy piece of cake to push through. So, I guess what I'm really trying to say is thank you. I do like eating spinach, but, it's good stuff. And I appreciate the way you're explaining it, taking the time to.
Thank you, Senator Cuff. So Amanda, did you have anything else to add at this point, or should we call for some public comment?
I have nothing further, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. All right, do we have public comment on this agenda item right now? And we will be looking for follow-up.
The other one's on there too, I would echo what Senator Cuff said about the box of wires not producing all this stuff, but it's the people behind it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't see any hands up online, so I think we can go into our next agenda item, Mr. Kotz.
Okay, so yeah, again, we felt very comfortable, or our folks in tax policy and research felt very comfortable with the new stumpage value calculation. What we're kind of wanting to bring up for discussion and for the committee to weigh in on is if you feel that any adjustments in how those counties are assigned to those forest zones are needed. And so I guess that's kind of, let me pull up just that zone map again real quick. So again, this is what the current zones are. These are just carried over from what Dr. Jackson had prepared for the 2021 reappraisal cycle. And at that time, I think he made one or two changes from what the 2015 to the 2021 reappraisal cycle were. And again, this would, any potential changes to these zones and how counties are assigned could impact all of those stumpage value calculations and cost calculations we just went through, because the sales from those zones, if there was a sale in one of these counties and we move that county to a different zone, then we'd have to go through that calculation again. Again, really the driving factors in these zones are what the costs are for those zones, and then the makeup of the timber species within those zones that drive the stumpage value that gets applied across those counties that are assigned to those zones. So again, we felt like that was probably something we should defer to the expertise of this committee that maybe have a little better understanding. And again, it is unfortunate that Gordy and Paul couldn't attend today, but this is when I spoke, when they both gave me a call, letting me know that they had something come up and couldn't make it. This is one of the things that we were gonna follow up specifically with them on to see if they, you know, had any recommendations. I know there's been a few mill closures since these were originally developed. I don't know if that, in their opinion or in your guys' opinion, as being kind of the industry experts, warrant consideration of changing these zones, but again, this is the current map, and we just wanted to bring that up as an item for you guys all to consider and discuss and think if there's any need to move counties from one zone to another.
Is it important to follow county lines?
Yeah, just the way our system works, I don't know that we could split a county and have the calculation work without some substantial changes, which would probably have substantial costs associated with them. So yeah, if at all possible, I think we'd have to adhere to county boundaries.
Nancy, I'm happy. I think it's really important to get our mill guys in this conversation, because they're gonna know about the mill closings that are in the various counties, and also how the economy of that account, or that, how it's going in that county, and the effect of prices and everything that's been relevant to their mills. So I think it's really important before we make any kind of motion that we understand what the ramifications have been and might be.
Senator Flowers.
Thank you, Senator Beard. I would agree with that. I think those guys have a better handle on what's happening in terms of costs and revenues than I do, for sure. So I would be interested in their opinion on this too. I am curious, in your data collection, was there anything that you saw that jumped out at you that suggests that we may want to consider a change in zone for a particular county?
Chair Beard, Senator Flowers, we didn't see anything, but also we weren't necessarily looking for anything. I haven't looked to see if these different sales in different areas should be changed to like a Missoula sale, maybe should be is more like the northwest zone than the southwest zone. I can look into it. We are reluctant, given our expertise, to recommend any changes to the zones. Like most people are saying, it sounds like the mill guys will definitely be more qualified to do that because they are experts in forestry and we are experts in data. So we can look and we can see if there's anything, but I don't know if we'd want to come forth and recommend any changes.
Thank you. And I was, and Senator Beard, thank you. And I wasn't really looking for any specific changes, but I think even for, if there are some things that look unusual to you, I think it might be worth at least highlighting those for Paul and Gordy and getting their reaction to that. There may be good explanation for some of those anomalies or not. So thanks.
Thank you, Cameron. You have your hand up?
Yes, just waiting for my video to kick on. Hi, everyone. My name is Cameron Wolschlegel, sitting in for Paul McKenzie. I'm the Lands and Resource Manager up here at Stoltz Land and Lumber. And I just wanted to agree with the committee in that if Pyramid does close doors permanently, it will definitely affect the values and costs for those landowners in Region 2. Just because they'll have to transport their timber further and it will have less value. And I know it's based on productivity, and I don't understand all your calculations, but I just wanted to let you know from our perspective that the revenue they will get will definitely be less because they'll have to transport their products further. And I will pass this along to Paul so he can have a better understanding of what your ask is, so he can address it. Help you guys.
Thank you. I think that with everybody weighing in, Nancy and Senator Flowers and Cameron also on behalf of Paul, this might be something that we have the Department of Revenue look at that calculation that we use, especially the stumpage value to mill calculation, get some input from our mill representatives and determine whether or not we're going to have to make some adjustments countywide to that map right now.
Senator Bid, if I may, can I add something
Certainly,
to that?
please.
Yeah,
Yes.
so if you remember, as I was explaining the model, there's 3 different categories of variables, and one is the zone, the other is the stump to mill, and the other is the index. So we have stump to mill variables. So any changes in the distance from the timber to the mill will be captured in the stump to mill in the regression model right now. So that will be covered already.
Okay.
The question about the zones is whether it's like a sale in Missoula is more like a sale in Lake County than Ravalli County, basically. So that's kind of what we're looking at when it comes to changing the zones. The stump to mill costs that will go up with these mill closures will be captured in the model as it is right now. Just wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Jared.
And I will say that's also the advantage of the committee recommending and getting that legislation passed last session to move to the 2-year reappraisal cycle off of the 6-year reappraisal cycle, is that we will be able in our models at stumpage values to be much more reactive to these types of changes than we would have been in the past, where, you know, if it was year 1 of a reappraisal and you suddenly have 3 mills closed, you know, we're looking at 5 years out before we're reevaluating those properties. Whereas now with the 2-year cycle, we'll be able to be much more reactive and make adjustments to those type of changes as they occur.
Thank you. Senator Cuff, what say you?
Senator Beard, I'm not sure what the question was.
What I'm looking at and what's been brought up is that perhaps we want to get some direct insight from both Gordy Sanders and Paul McKenzie before we take any action on finalizing the map right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I kind of kicked that conversation off, but then but yeah, and there's a lot of other things that go into those classifications. I think such as species grown typically and, I don't know, I'll call it, I guess, growing conditions, type of terrain. So, but yeah, absolutely, we need their input and, I'm kind of getting a sense, at least from the revenue people, I think, is that I'll just ask the question, do you feel that we did okay on what we've done this far? And we just need perhaps to most likely not tinker with it too much until we get another cycle?
I'm not sure I'm the expert on that
Sure.
exactly, but we feel good about the model. You have something to add, Robin?
Well, so Chair Beard, are you perhaps making a request that the department sit down with the industry experts to talk this piece over and the zones over and then make a recommendation back to this committee? Is that what you'd like us to do?
Ms. Rude, I am so glad you put that so succinctly, because yes, I think that with the way it's been presented by the department, we had some great foresight last interim to move this reappraisal every couple of years. So I think it's going to cover us, but I would like a blessing from our industry experts before putting the final bow on this. So yes, please, and then make recommendation back to the committee. Thank you.
That's perfect. If I might add, Senator, that she summed it up very well.
Makes me happy again. You were talking, or we were talking about a mill closure. When you're gathering your data for these different items, these or different things that go into the equation, how do you find out the mill closed?
We'll see it in the DNRC's estimates for costs. So because they have the distance to the mill, and if there's a timber sale in Granite County, they're probably gonna have to go further now than they used to.
Okay,
So based on our model and my understanding of forestry, the stump to mill or the mill closers shouldn't need to change the zones in themselves. If the mill closers changed how the land is logged, then maybe they would, but the stump to mill and the longer distances and all those costs are gonna be captured in the model as
Okay.
it is. If something changed that makes Mineral County more like Sanders County than it used to be, that's when we would wanna change a zone county to a different zone.
okay, thank you.
All right, do we have any further comments before we go to public comments? Okay, seeing none. Do we have any public comment in the room?
Well, again, you know, I agree with just getting the mill people together, because it's not just the wood product, it's the residual as well. I know Sun right now is sending it to Thompson River, I believe. And, Marks, I know is trucking theirs all the way to Columbia Falls, where they used to go to steal it. So to Wire. So it's, and the moving cost for us on the east side here has changed dramatically, but you can find truckers particularly. I don't use a lot of them, but where I sell a semi-load of firewood, for example, 20-foot log or I can't find a trucker who's willing to come and do that. If they're working for one of these existing contractors that's already stretched, they're staying there. So thank you for getting another discussion with the mills and the experts involved. I'm certainly not one of them, but it does have an impact.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment online?
Not seeing any hands, Chair Beard.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to our next agenda item. Amanda, you're up again with the administrative rule manual changes review.
Thank you, Chair Bird. Moving forward into the 2025 reappraisal means we are moving into different valuations and just some cleanup or a little slight amendment of our administrative rules. The first one, 42, our administrative rule. The first one is Administrative Rule 42-18-205 under the definitions. I have requested for it to read agricultural land classification and appraisal versus just the slash, and just by adding the and in there, it just creates the verbiage to use in plain language. The next amendment that we are requesting is on Administrative Rule 42-20-173. Is statutory deadlines for requests for informal classification and appraisal reviews form AB 26. Because we are moving to a 2-year cycle versus a 6-year cycle, the verbiage in this administrative rule is no longer a valid verbiage. So we cleaned it up to include class 10 to be a part of that 2-year valuation cycle for the form AB 26 and the right to appeal. And having said that, that involved removing or repealing section 4 and 5 from the administrative rule, which speaks again to class 10 being on a 6-year cycle, using an AB 26 form to request to be entered into a different class, like moving from a class 3 or 4 to a class 10, or changing the valuation, anything to appeal the class 10. We no longer use the form AB 26 to move somebody into class 10. So that is requested to be removed out of there. So by striking, excuse me, section 4 and 5 and updating 1, 2, and 3 with the relevant text, class 10 property has been updated and no longer has a different valuation cycle than class 3 and 4. And then moving on to Administrative Rule 42-2740, that's the natural disaster reduction. The natural disaster application form AB 25, class 10 has been added to that. So we are requesting for that verbiage to be added to these sections by updating section 2, little a, little b, section 3, and section 3E to reflect the natural disaster application AB 25 that was amended February 2022 to include forest and to remove the use of the request for an informal classification and appraisal review form, which is also an AB 26. So the application has had class 10 forest on it since 2022. This is just cleaning up the administrative rule to match the form. And then the last one, Administrative Rule 42-2745 is the forest land value change process. We are requesting to repeal this because it's no longer a 6-year cycle or use a VBR evaluation. So it's felt that this administrative rule is no longer relevant at all, and we're requesting for it to be repealed.
So yeah, these are all largely just cleanups to get rid of VBR and mention of a 6-year cycle and move to the 2-year cycle. They're still going through the internal process. We just wanted to give you guys an idea of what those changes were. But both this and the manual are both adopted through administrative rule. So once they have gone through our internal process, they'll get noticed on the Secretary of State's website. There'll be a public hearing, a period for public comment, so that if there is anyone that has official issues with any of the changes or comments they want to provide, this is all gonna go through the normal administrative rule process, which at that point, these drafts will be made publicly available, and then will be the public hearing and a public comment period. But we just wanted to give you, as the forest committee, just kind of an idea of what changes would be coming. And again, nothing substantial other than cleanup related to moving from the 6-year cycle to the 2-year cycle.
Do you need that in the form of a motion?
Nope, this is just, again, wanted to kind of show you guys in advance, if you will, of what will occur, but I think these are with our legal. He'll get them actually finalized and filed with the Secretary of State, and then that opens again. It will get scheduled for public hearing, have a public comment period. I'm sure you'll probably all get notification because there's interested party emails that go out whenever these rules, and I'm sure everyone associated with this committee is in that interested party list. So again, just kind of a heads up on what's coming. This wasn't provided to the public because it's not finalized yet. Once that process has occurred, they'll be posted on the website, on the Secretary of State's website, and go through that official process.
Thank you, Mr. Cotts. Do we have any advisory committee questions or comments?
Yes, what is VBR?
That's value before reappraisal. So that dealt with the phase in on the 6-year cycle where we phased in the value before reappraisal with what the current reappraisal value was over that 6-year period. So now that we're on the 2-year period, we no longer need to have a value before reappraisal that's phased in over the 6 years. Value
By
before
reappraisal.
Okay, do we have any questions or comments from the public in the room? Seeing, hearing none. Do we have any online?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Cotts. We'll look forward to getting noticed from the Secretary of State on these proposed rule changes and the hearing coming up. Okay, here's an item that I remember from our last interim, the Forest Advisory Committee members' term review.
Oh,
Madam Chair.
we're not ready
Yes.
for that.
We're not ready for that?
That was a two-part, that was a two-parter. That was
Manual
administrative.
changes. Okay,
Okay.
sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Running through the manual, it was requested by the committee, I believe in 2021, to move the history, and I'm only going off by my predecessor's notes, to move the history section in the manual as a addendum, and that has been done. So the history section of the manual was moved to being an addendum of the manual. As
Hey,
you
Amanda.
look,
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
as we're looking through the manual, a lot of these changes are just, housekeeping, updating the dates, the address, and some of the verbiage, cleaning up the verbiage to make it more plain language and easier to understand. None of the biggest change I believe that we did in the forest manual was moving the history to being an addendum. There is a section in the manual on page 8 that I want to bring before the committee for their we're getting there. On page 8, we talk about contiguous forest land and what constitute as being contiguous versus non-contiguous. And right now it says that anything that is 120 feet or wider and greater than 5 acres breaks the contiguity of forest land. Forest land, in order to be classified as class 10, has to be a minimum of 15 acres. So in your handouts that you received, there was some examples. Yep, those examples. So currently, we want clarification from the committee of what the intent was by the 120-foot 5 acre and 5 acre rule to the contiguity of forest. Does it mean, are you looking within inside the parcel boundary of the parcel in question, like, or are you meaning altogether? Like, if you were to look at this one right here, if you look inside the parcel, they may not meet both the 120 and the 5 acres, but if it extends past the parcel and goes up to where the non-forested area continues, it would be well over that 5 acre mark. So we are asking the committee for clarification so we can give that clarification in our manual.
So essentially, I guess to kind of elaborate further on this parcel that we have up, the one in the middle of the screen, our current practice on this parcel is we would consider that non-contiguous because of the 128 break between the left section of timber and the right section of timber, and the fact that that break is greater than 5 acres. But when we're making that 5 acre determination, we're including that swath that runs up into the parcel above it. That's current practice, is saying there's a 120-foot break and then looking at the total acreage. So the easier one to maybe look at is that highway example. Is current practice is if that highway was 120 acres and broke that parcel and that highway ran 100 miles, we would add up that entire length of that highway in making that acreage determination currently. And we're proposing or asking for your recommendation of whether that's more appropriate to just be limited to a 5 acres within the parcel boundaries itself and not extend whatever that break is into perpetuity. So in this case, we would be just saying, okay, there's a 120-foot gap here. And then only adding the acreage for this section that falls within that parcel instead of that entire acreage of that break. So that's really the difference we're talking about. Should it be confined to just what's within the boundaries of that parcel itself, or extend that outside of the actual parcel?
Because the impact in this picture, as an example, is both sides of that break would have to be at least 15 acres contiguous themselves in order for both sides of that break to be considered forest. So if the left-hand side of that break is only 10 acres, it is no longer classified as forest land because it's not 15 acres of contiguous. And so what is the desire of the committee? Should that be the case? Should that left-hand side of this parcel have to meet 15 acres on its own? Or should both sides of that parcel essentially be forest land?
Senator Flowers, do you have something to add here?
I have a question. Thank you, Senator Beard. My question is, what defines the parcel? Is it by ownership, or what is distinguishing those parcels?
So they would be distinguished by their described recorded legal description within the clerk and recorder. So either meets and bounds, a certificate of survey, a governmental aliquot part. A parcel is the legal boundary. When we talk contiguity, we would extend that to parcels that are in the same ownership. So the parcel itself is described by its legal description, how it's recorded. For determining this 15 acres of contiguity to make this determination. If these two parcels were owned in the exact same ownership, then they would be considered contiguous for our purposes of classification.
And if I might, Madam Chair, and what if they were different ones?
They're different ownerships, then they would each have to meet that 15 acres of contiguous timberland to qualify. So if you had 10 acres and your son had 10 acres that were both in your individual ownerships, neither of you would qualify for timberland because you don't have 15 contiguous acres. Whereas if those two 10-acre parcels were both in your name, then you would meet the forest land classification because you have 20 contiguous acres in total.
So what's the question?
So the question is, in this example right here, you can see to the right where it's highlighted, so the non-forested acres equals 3.32 acres. You can see that to the right there. So currently, as it stands, if a parcel is 120 feet or greater wide and 5 acres or greater overall of non-forested acres, it would break the contiguity between the forest chunk on the left and the forest chunk on the right. Currently, how it stands, we don't leave it just inside the parcel boundary. It's the total non-forested area. So we would actually measure up into until the non-forested area ended. And that would be our acre size that we would use. So in this particular example, it currently would stand as contiguous because it's under 5 acres. And it could be 128 feet across, but because it's under 5 acres, it would still be contiguous.
Okay, what am I looking at? We got the X,
So this,
the light blue X.
so this
Okay,
is the
there.
parcel
Okay,
in total.
okay.
So you see the timbered portion on the left-hand part of the parcel and the timbered portion on the right-hand
Okay.
part of the
What
parcel.
is it in the middle?
That's
Um,
not,
Non-forest,
it's just non-forest.
It's got a house, some buildings on the bottom there, and then it could be some grazing land or something else
And the
happening.
width of that again is 120 or?
So, yeah, so let's just say that the timbered piece on the right of this parcel is 20 acres. And the timbered piece on the left is only 10 acres. And then the non-forested piece that splits the two is 3.3 acres. So our current practice is we would say that those 10 acres on the left-hand portion of this parcel are not classified as timberland because this piece in the middle breaks the contiguity with the timbered piece on the right that is over the 15 acres. And because when we calculate both the width of the break and the total acreage, our current process is we would also include this swath and the parcel above in calculating what that total acreage was, which is right now our limit is 5 acres. So say if that was 2 acres up above, current practice, we would add these 2 acres from this non-timbered piece with the 3.3 acres of this non-timbered piece. And since it's 120 feet in width, we would say that these 10 acres on the left-hand portion of this parcel are not classified as timberland because they're not contiguous with the 20 acres that meet it over here. What we're proposing is that we would keep that 120 feet in width adjustment, but we would only look within the parcel itself when calculating whether that break is 5 acres or larger. And so in this case, this parcel, these 10 acres would be considered contiguous to these because this total break is only 3.3 acres. That makes sense.
I think it makes sense to me. Okay, if you're asking to, I think it's a good idea, yeah. I think that's it.
That is what
I like.
we are asking, yes. Is the committee to make a decision on whether we keep with our current methodology or we make this change in our methodology and subsequently update our manual to say that that 5 acres has to be contained within the parcel itself.
And in this case, both parcels would be under the same ownership. That's what I'm struggling with. The one on the top and the one on the bottom is the same ownership.
It may be the same ownership and it may not be the same ownership. I mean, the only difference there would be is if this parcel on the, was the same ownership, then this entire acreage of the timbered property would be added together for determination of the total contiguous acres. And this portion on this side would be added together for that determination.
So is there a different way to, I'm sorry, I'm still struggling with the question. If this was in different ownership, under the new, let me try and ask you to explain it this way. Could you explain your old approach and your new approach if it's in the same ownership and if it's in two different ownerships?
Sure. So if it's in different ownerships right now, if this parcel was owned by John Doe and this parcel was owned by Jane Smith, our current practice would be again to evaluate the width of this break in the non-timbered piece. Is it greater than 120 feet in width? Yes, it is. And then is it greater than 5 acres in size? And our current practice is we would not only look at that break total acreage within that parcel that John Doe owns, we'd also include this break in the parcel that Jane Smith owned to see if it's at 5 acres or greater in size. The proposed change would be that we would no longer look outside of those parcel boundaries. So when making that determination, we would just look at the width of the break and then the total acreage of the break within that parcel itself.
Okay, that's if it's two different ownerships. And if it's one ownership, you would consider the total. Is that correct?
Correct. But then we
Okay.
would also be including this piece up above and looking at this entire section to determine whether it qualifies as having 15 acres of contiguous or not. So if this piece was 12 acres and this was 14, it would still qualify because its total acreage is greater than the 15.
So Bill's asking if you go to the next picture that shows the total break. And I believe down at the very bottom of that picture is our original one that we were showing. And then you can see how that total break goes up and hits 2, 3, 4 parcels all together is what we're currently calculating the 5 acres at.
I guess I have a question. How often does this occur in this land classification and ownership across the state when you have rivers and streams that break up?
More than you
land?
think.
Really?
And bigger than just this example, the highway parts have a bigger impact because if you're having to consider the entire acreage of the highway that runs past there, you might own trees on both sides of the highway. If you're considering the highway, it's gonna be more than 5 acres every time. And so your 10 acres across the highway is no longer contiguous, if you think of it that way as well.
So where would we be at trying to, here's a word I always love in taxation, to incentivize the production of forest with production of forest products. Why can't we just go ahead and try to incorporate that lost land being streams and highways and easements and so forth. Just try to keep it all into a consolidated block so we don't lose out on producing lumber products.
I guess to some extent, that's what this change would do. It would be keeping more acreage in classified as class 10 because we would be considering a smaller exclusion from kicking those properties out by only looking at that break in acreage within the parcel instead of that continual break in acreage. So this would result in more property staying or getting classified as class 10 timberland.
Is this procedure or law that we're talking about here? Is this how you do your calculations, or is this also in law that you have to do it this way?
No, in law, it just says that forest land is 15 contiguous acres or greater in size. That's the minimum acreage you have to get classified as timber and then still meet the productive piece of the puzzle. This is simply us trying to interpret, okay, what does contiguous mean? Because it doesn't say in statute that contiguous is anything. We, as a department and administering the law, have to make some kind of determination in what constitutes contiguous and what doesn't constitute contiguous. And that's where this is what the current practice is and has been. And this is what we're asking for some guidance from you all on is, does that make sense? Or should we maybe look at tweaking that practice to some extent?
I don't know as if we have to tweak the practice, but I think we have to tweak the definition of what this overall contiguousness means.
To my notion, it would make sense to be inclusive on it,
Mhm.
include it all. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it there. You can dream up all kinds of possibilities. But from what we're looking at, I would say, yeah, let's be inclusive. Unless somebody can come up with a good argument why we should not. I'm assuming if that's his property, he's probably gonna manage it all about the same.
Well, and I
He's
have
gonna
one
argue with
more hat on, I'm sorry for interrupting. But there are state tax appeal board, I was on the state tax appeal for 12 years, I was chair for 6. We had decisions made on this, and it's management and control. The contiguity is not broken by the railroad track, by the river, by the interstate highway. If the management, ownership and control is the same. So you get away from the how wide is it, how big, how narrow, and it retains whatever that classification is that you put on it. The contiguity for class 10 is not broken.
Cameron has.
Cameron, go ahead.
So manage 40,000 acres of Stoltz property. And a lot of our lands are broken up by meadows, rivers, highways. And even if it's on the same track, just because we have little islands of timber, I mean, we feel like it should be classified as forest land. I think that's, Paul would say the same thing. If there's 10 acres on one side of a meadow that you're 120 foot width. I'm also curious where the 120 foot came from. But I just wanted to put those 2 cents in there, kind of like what Pat was just saying. It's all managed the same, just broken up based on terrain. And I think you'd find that as you went east in Montana, more of that open country, find more open country that would be broken up, and timber might be on like the north facing slopes, for example, over there, just on aspects and moisture and eating cold and where they can survive. So throw it out
Thank you,
there for
Cameron.
consideration. Yep, thank you.
Madam Chair, to answer Cameron's question is regarding the 120 feet, where it came from. If we look to Administrative Rule 422705, forest land classification, section 1, little b, it does state that the softwood timber stocked at 10% or greater on an area of at least 120 feet in width. So I believe that that's where the 120-foot rule was developed.
Thank you.
And to be perfectly honest, some of this is from the old guard that was here 30 years ago making these decisions, and none of us can happen to come across the reasons why, and so we would like to create some new reasons why going forward.
Yeah,
That we can understand.
Yes.
it's currently in the manual as a, excuse me, the 120 feet and 5 acres. We want clarification to keep that 5 acre size within the parcel boundaries. I have not found anything to reflect back to where the 5 acres came from. Where that 5 acre rule came from other than our manual. I don't know if it was a previous committee decision but I haven't been able to find it in any administrative rule or MCA. And if the committee does decide to leave it inside the parcel, it actually does bring up a second question of how to clean up our manual and how the process is going to be.
Commissioner Chilcott.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I too would like to incentivize production, and I'm a little curious about the arbitrary nature, it appears, of the 120 feet width. It's really a strange number when you think about just the number itself. 125 is a round number-ish, and 100, but how we came up with 120, I don't really understand, and the explanation it's the way we've been doing it is a fair explanation for sure, but maybe we can do better.
Thank you. And one of the things that's crossing my mind is when we have a density of parcel, overall parcel or contiguous portions, if we have blank spots in the center of that, whether it's for the stream beds or utilities or easements or highways, maybe we can determine what a bona fide percentage or value could be to kind of override taking out that parcel of land that is not productive. Just a thought.
I did just a quick search on 120 feet forest land and came up with Forest Service definition of accessible forest is forest land with at least a stocking of 10% of live forest trees of any size, blah, blah, blah. Minimum area for classification of forest land is usually 1 acre with a minimum width of 120 feet.
Right.
So I think that's probably where that 120 feet came from, is from that Forest Service. And we're just taking that same definition and saying, if that's what it takes to qualify as forest land, then a gap of that much breaks the contiguity of the forest land. And then that 5 acre is just so that, you know, it's not arbitrarily breaking contiguity over things like meadows or something. There has to be some large area of break. And so the question is, should that be confined to an owner's own parcel, or should it also include adjacent parcels in measuring that 5 acre minimum?
Thank you.
And your proposal is just to assess that within ownership, correct?
That's
Yes.
correct.
Which makes sense to me. Thank you.
Do you need that in the motion, or?
I think we would like that in a
Yes.
motion.
I would make the motion that the determination of contiguity would be restricted to the parcel, the ownership of that parcel.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that, Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
I,
All right,
Aye. And those opposed? Signed by nay. Okay. Go ahead, Randy.
What's the tax consequences either way for that landowner? If that parcel's now, if it's class 10 or if it's, what would it go back to agriculture?
It depends.
Yeah.
Good answer.
Depending on the size of the overall parcel, so if it is 20 acres or greater overall in size, anything that does not qualify for timber would fall into the non-qualified classification. If it's less than 20 acres, it would fall into the class 4, or if it's commercial, it'd be commercial. It would just depends on what the use is of that area that doesn't qualify.
In this example though,
So if that, in this example, if it was 20 acres, that 10 acres on the other side, if it didn't qualify, that forest would be classified as non-qual. If it was under 20 acres total in size, that forested acre would be classified as class 4 tract land.
Market value.
Market land,
Market
yeah.
value.
so
What
they
is that?
pay more taxes on.
They would
Correct.
essentially end up having, at the end of the day, they would pay more taxes because not only would the non-forested area be in market value, the forested area that doesn't qualify would also be in market value. So it would heat a higher tax bill. So I have, do we have that one last, it's one more. It has like the big white chunk out of it. So
Go ahead, Amanda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have one more now that the committee has agreed to those proposed amendments. This brings up another question to be clarified by the committee. So if we are looking at the the non-forested area inside of a parcel that's 120 feet by 5 acres, are we only measuring, currently as it is, we would measure everything that's not forest, including in between forests. So in this example, we have a forested area on the top and we have a forested area on the bottom. The non-forested area in between do not meet the 125 acre rule, but if I measure everything off to the side out of the non-forested area, it would hit that overall, over the 5 acre rule and over the 120 rule. So the next proposal that I am asking for the committee to consider, are we only measuring, do we consider the total acreage inside the parcel period? Or are we only looking at what is breaking the forested area?
Okay. It's quiet. What is that, a power line
So
right away?
this is just a non-forested area, so it could be a power line, it could just be where their house
Could be
is.
a highway,
Could be a
could
highway,
be a meadow.
yep, so it could be anything except.
So a meadow in the middle of the forest is not considered, or we,
It'd be the
let's
non-timbered
say it's a
area.
pond, what if it's this pond that's kind of swampy?
It's still a non-timbered area.
If it's a meadow, the meadow may seed in. At the same time, if we're talking about some of the larger, I guess it could be anybody, but if a guy, if they log a thing, if they clear cut an area,
Right.
then are we saying that's no longer forested?
Well,
That's treated separately.
yeah. So the way we look at it now, we get our information from the NRCS, there was a big, back in 2009 is when we got all of our forest data. So we have a forest layer of anything that was in productive commercial timber. So in this example, I'm saying we have productive timber on top, we have productive timber on the bottom. But
the swath in the middle is non-productive, and then on the side of this gentleman's parcel is non-productive. Do we consider just what's in between the forested acres or in between the forested area when we're determining that 125 acre rule, or is it the total inside the parcel boundary?
Yeah, Amanda, I wanted to ask a question about that land in the middle. Could that also be for livestock grazing? Is it already claimed in another classification?
Hypothetically, Ms. Chair, it could be. It's just non-timber. So I guess my question that I want clarification on is now that you've moved to only for us to look inside the parcel boundary when determining the 125 acre rule instead of exceeding outside the total. Do we only look what is actually breaking the timber and not what is the total non-timber?
Madam Chair, we have a
Yes.
stakeholder in the room that has done some work in this tax world. Would it be fair to ask him for some input?
Oh, please do.
Well, my understanding would be that it's non-qualifying ag, depending on, if the ownership and control is the same, then you'd have that non-qualified category,
My question is,
but not you.
that piece, the little rectangle piece in between the two green spots, so the green is representing timber. Okay? Let's say we have 20 acres on the top and 14 acres on the bottom, okay? You need 15 to qualify. If I measure the little strip that's breaking them right now, it's less than 120 feet wide. That little strip is less than 5 acres, so the contiguity would still be there. But in this particular parcel, the 5 acres is extending outside of the actual forested area.
Is it same ownership?
Same, it's one parcel. That's just one part, we're only looking at one parcel.
But that is a non-qualifying ag.
Right now,
Depending on
what
the
would,
size.
yeah, so depending on the size. But right now,
So your question on the timber side of it remains the same, continuity is not broken.
exactly, it's
And what
how.
you have is a non-qual parcel within that, could be grazing, it could.
But do we measure just what's in between the forested area when we're talking about the
No.
5 acre rule? Or do you want us
I
to
see.
measure the total non-timbered area in the parcel?
Boy, you
For
keep
co-
throwing wrenches in all of that. That's a good question.
I'm asking for clarification.
But again, I think it's, I mean, you gotta look at the management control, and it's a timber part.
So are we all, so in your opinion, we should only be looking at what's breaking the forest area?
If I get somebody brought that question to me in form of life, I would say that it does not, management and control still is the issue, and it is one parcel of last.
Mr. Wolfschlegel.
Don't know that the size really matters.
Well, the size would matter in the overall acres, so right now, if anything that's 120
Yeah,
feet
does that.
or wider and 5 acres or greater breaks the contiguity of
Right.
forest. But
From a timber landowner's perspective, doesn't meet the 120 feet rule, so it should be contentious, and the others area to the left shouldn't be accumulated in the 5 acre rule, in my opinion, because you could have a draw meadow going to a big meadow, for example, or whatever, a highway, and then some other use on the other side. But not breaking the continuity on this example, that should remain all forest land, my opinion. Does that make sense? My perspective?
yes, sir.
Any
Is that
further
enough?
comments?
Is that enough of a clarification or to rewrite the manual that will also be adopted by rule? Or would you like a motion?
I'd like a motion, but I. Okay.
Do you want to word it?
Huh?
Do you want to word it?
Well, I just want to make sure everyone's understanding what I'm asking and, Senator Clough. So this parcel on top and this parcel on the bottom, should we only be looking at this part that breaks it? Or should we include this part because he owns this stuff too, this is one parcel,
Oh. So that's the,
but this has nothing to do with this forest breaking, this does. Does that clear it up?
okay, well, what,
I just want to
no,
make sure everyone's on the same page.
okay, what did you say about this?
So this
We're
is,
talking about the T, the sideways T.
right. So it's all one parcel, one owner. The top half is 20 acres, the bottom half of the forestry is 14 acres. If you look at the leg of the T, it is, in this example, let's say it is 125 feet wide, but it's less than 5 acres. So it does not meet. But if I measure everything at 125 feet wide, and the total non-timbered area of this parcel is 10 acres, it breaks contiguity. But that 10 acres is not part of the it's not breaking the forest. So as it sits right now in our process, we would say this would break the contiguity of the forest because it's over 5 acres and it's over 120 feet wide. Even though the big chunk on the side is not actually breaking the forestry. So my question is, are we the department to only look at what is breaking the forest area? Or are we looking at all the non-timbered when we're considering that 5 acre portion of the rule?
I would think you're only looking at the part that breaks the forest.
Okay. I just want to make sure, like I was explaining it, so everyone understood it on the committee.
Go ahead, Senator Flowers.
Yeah, I would agree with both Senator Cuff and Cameron on that they only look at the piece that's breaking between the forest tracks.
Further discussion?
I would look to amend it for that wording.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mannix.
Do we need a motion for that?
Or do we want to amend the original one?
Yeah, and to amend the original motion.
Sure.
I need a word.
Yes, please.
I've moved to amend the manual to state that the non-timbered portion that breaks contiguity is held inside the parcel boundaries of the parcel boundary of the legal parcel. And it is only looked to what is breaking the actual forested acres.
And Mr. Mannix, is that the revised amendment or the revised motion that you'd like to make?
Yes.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, do we have any further discussion before we go ahead and vote on this? Seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, say nay. Thank you. It passes. We'll go ahead and proceed with getting that update made to the manual.
Thank you,
And
Madam.
Madam Chair, I might add at this point,
Yes,
there was-
Senator Cox.
if there's grizzly bear, dung on any pile of that, then it probably manages grizzly bear habitat.
Madam Chair, I would like to move forward with the rest of, changes to the manual.
Pardon me, Amanda?
I would like to move forward with the remaining amendments to our manual.
Go
There's
ahead,
not-
please.
Thank you. There's not, a lot of other changes. Again, a lot of it is just verbiage cleanup for us. One thing, some changes that will be on hold until we talk to, Gordy and Paul, our zone maps. We did repeal and remove out the valuation phase-in portion of our manual for 2025 because it is being repealed in 2025. So that whole section regarding on page 15 of the manual, the valuation phase-in and the value before reappraisal section will be removed from the manual. And I think that is the only other major change that we created in the manual. We did add the 2023 legislative session to the addendum, the history addendum. And I believe that was the end of the manual changes.
Thank you. Now, do we have any further questions or comments from the committee members? None in the room, any online?
I'm not seeing any, Madam Chair, no.
The next,
Thank you, Mr. Billman. Okay. Now, on to the next agenda item. Mr. Cox, talking about the term review for committee members.
yeah, though I think this is probably something that we should have addressed in the bill drafts before, because it's now gonna be somewhat outdated when we go from the 6-year cycle to the 2-year cycle. And that's length of term for the committee members of the Forest Land Taxation Advisory Committee. The piece of statute that still remains, let me pull it up here. So this section here says the committee must be appointed and convened no later than July 1 of the year that is 2 years prior to the first year of each reappraisal cycle. The terms of the members expire on June 30th of the first year of each reappraisal cycle. Those are basically the same dates now that we're on a 2-year cycle. Is June 30th of the reappraisal year is preceded by July 1 of 2 years before the next reappraisal. So the committee is technically expiring and supposed to be appointed and meeting again within 1 day. I think you've all seen a lot of benefit in longer length terms for this committee, so that when we have these meetings, we aren't kind of starting over from square one with a deep dive into how forest land valuation works. So I think we just need to clean up this language to some extent to define what the terms of the committee members would be. Again, just as a refresher, the makeup of the committee is a little different than some of the other ones, as there's 5 members appointed by the governor, 2 members appointed by the majority and minority of the Senate, and 2 members appointed by the majority and minority of the House. So I don't know if we need to differentiate the length of terms between that makeup itself with, you know, legislative turnover not aligning necessarily with what the governor's term of office would be. So just an item for general discussion on what we think term lengths should look like and how we might clean up this language to, achieve that goal.
Oh, do we have House? Yeah, Senator Beard?
Pardon me?
Madam,
Yes,
who are the current legislative members? There's Flowers, you and I, and
Marilyn
Marlon.
Marlar, Representative Marlar.
Marlon, yes. Uh,
And this is one of the items that there's still some confusion on, and we were hoping to get clarity on is, again, this past legislative session, you, Senator Cuff and Senator Flowers were reappointed from Senate leadership to this committee. The House members, we never received new appointments for the actual House members, so we just proceeded with keeping the committee as it was made up before. With now Senator Beard and Representative Marlar acting as those two House representatives, because we never actually received an updated committee members from House leadership, either the minority or majority. So again, that's another one of those things that if there's some way to clean up so that we can make sure, is if you remember from the past interims work, one of the reasons we ended up in this whole process to begin with is we didn't have these meetings leading up to the 2021 reappraisal cycle, because once again, we didn't get any appointments from the respective groups. So we're really, again, term length and then hoping to clean this up somehow.
Senator Flowers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd recommend 4-year terms, and obviously that would be pending reelection for House members. And we reappoint as necessary. Because I think there is a really big value to some continuity. And kind of in the near term, I think we need to, for the coming term, determine, since Senator Beard moved from the House over to the Senate by appointment, we now have 2 Senate members on the Republican side in the House and a Senate member on the Democratic side. So I think we will need to lose one of the Senate members and pick up a House member on the Republican side.
Thank you. Yes, and I think I do recall some discussion with last year's, well, the last interim committee discussions on this agenda item, in that we've had some longer term committee members, and perhaps we do want to make it a little bit downsized in length of terms from 2 to 4 years. And I think that it's been discussed already that a 4-year term would lend toward keeping some expertise and some historical references on the committee to function going forward. So I think 4-year terms might be something that we want to look at. And I think that we do need to bring it back into having 2 House members and 2 Senate members as far as appointments by each of those chambers' leadership. Any further discussion?
So because this would be a legislative change, how do we recommend sponsoring the bill that would make these changes?
I think it's just a house cleaning kind of a bill. You know, I was appointed to this, I think this is the committee I was appointed to in 2011 and maybe 2013. As far as I know, I was never told about a meeting or anything else. It was like, you know, this is a committee, you'll like this because you're in timber country, but I don't think it meant during, to my knowledge, it never met until we got this one going. I think it has a little more prominence now, and especially with the connection we have that is, well, making sure we meet.
Yeah, that is one of the changes that technically goes in effect starting in 2025 is it's at that point mandated that this committee meet at least once every year moving forward versus that wasn't the requirement before, but that was one of the changes in the past session bill drafts is that starting in 2025, this committee is required to meet at least once per year moving forward. I think there's just this leftover cleanup. It's also required that this committee make a report or presentation to the Revenue Interim Committee. Which I think we'll probably be doing in the August meeting. I think, I see Ms. Moore is on there. That is not accurate.
Madam
Ms.
Chair,
Moore, Ms. Moore, would you like to add your 2 cents worth since you are the staffer for the Revenue Interim Committee?
Sure. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Yes, I heard from DOR that they would like to do that report in August. I did put a note in the chat that the report could include a recommendation about changing the committee membership. However, if you wait till August, that's the last regular meeting of the Revenue Interim Committee. So they wouldn't be able to look at legislation after that meeting. Unless they made an exception and did it at the revenue estimate meeting in November, which we prefer not to do.
Senator Cuff, did you have something to add?
well, I don't know what decisions we're making at this meeting. If we were going to defer some, I think we had the lump, Paul and those folks involved. And does that mean we have to step up another meeting next month, maybe?
Well, I guess that would be maybe dependent on how those conversations with Paul and Gordy go. And I would think if we meet with them and discuss these items and they don't have any recommended changes to those forest zones, I don't necessarily see a need for this committee to meet again and take any action. If I would say if they did have some recommended changes to those zones, then we would want to have an additional meeting and just get that formally approved by the committee. But from the sounds of everything that's been reviewed today, it doesn't sound like there's any recommended changes. So if they don't have any additional recommended changes to the materials, I don't see a need to meet again, but I will leave that up to you, Madam Chair, and the committee to make a final call on. But I would think if they're fine with everything presented today, just like I think the majority of the group was, there probably isn't necessarily a need to meet again.
Thank you. Well, if they do not have any revisions to the recommendations made today or not made, I think that we need to proceed with drafting something for the Revenue Interim Committee to get on their agenda for getting these terms and appointments from both the House and Senate chambers made and solidified. So in that event, Ms. Moore, may I impose upon you yet again to let us know what could possibly be cobbled together, maybe by the June 24th meeting, or to incorporate a draft bill recommendation to Revenue Interim Committee for, I believe, is it the September meeting?
Madam Chair, since you are conveniently also the chair of the Revenue Interim Committee, we can add an agenda item for our June meeting to discuss the member terms. And then if the committee would like to request legislation, we could do that for the August. It's August 16th is our last meeting.
Thank you. Well, I think that in anticipation of no further recommendations from our industry specialists, once they're contacted by our staff here, Department of Revenue staff, I think that we want to go ahead and put it on the Revenue Interim Committee agenda for June 24th to peruse the changes for committee appointments in June, and then go forward from there. I don't anticipate that we would need to have any more of our advisory committee meetings. So I think that would be the good way to go.
If the question comes up, Madam Chair, and I'm good with what you said, but should the question come up that we might need to formalize something before then, we could probably do it on a strictly, very short Zoom meeting of some sort.
A Zoom meeting or specifically related to what, Senator Cuff?
If we needed to make a vote on the recommendation that's going forward.
On term limits or any changes from industry experts?
Whatever we're sending to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll play it by ear. We'll remain a bit flexible, but being an optimistic sort for today anyway, we'll just proceed with not anticipating any changes from our experts from the industry and going ahead and making a recommendation to Revenue Interim Committee to please go ahead and formalize changes for term limits and appointments. Is that good with everybody?
I agree.
Any further discussion?
And Madam Chair, and those changes that we would be recommending would be to go to 4-year terms and to clear up the appointments between the House and the Senate and update those.
I think that's going to be the recommendation that is to be made to the Revenue Interim Committee, and it will be up to that committee to finalize. Any further revisions? Ms. Moore, do I have that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair, I was just gonna point out something different, so I didn't want to interrupt Senator Flowers' comments.
Oh, okay.
One more thing is, do we need to look at the timing of the appointments, which is kind of reflected in the current law? Does that need to change now that it's going from a 6-year reappraisal to a 2-year reappraisal? It was on the screen earlier and it's not there now, so I can't remember what was there, but it seems like that's something that we need to consider. Is that correct, Bryce?
Yeah, I think we would need to strike that particular section of the current law and replace it with whatever this new language is. There probably needs to be some timing considerations involved, because I don't know how we would do it, but I think you'd want those staggered some, so
yes,
you didn't potentially lose the entire committee in an appointment cycle. I think we'd probably have to think about what that would look like, but certainly just the reference to reappraisal cycles probably isn't the way to go anymore, with one, the change that this committee is required to meet annually going forward, and two, that those dates on a 2-year reappraisal cycle, they made sense on the 6-year cycle, but they no longer make sense on a 2-year cycle. So yeah, I would say that portion would be stricken as this recommendation and then replaced with this 4-year concept.
So maybe what we have to agree on today is that we're going to recommend 4-year terms staggered. And then we'll work out the language on how to reflect that. Does that make sense?
Yes, Ms. Moore, do you have something to add to that?
It's not about the years exactly, but I did want to point out there was discussion about senators versus House members serving on the committee, and the only requirement in statute is that their members have expertise in forest matters. There's not actually a requirement that they be legislators. So if you wish for them to be legislators, you may want to add that.
Further discussion? Seeing none. All right, so we will want to impose upon Ms. Moore if possible and Mr. Kotz to see if we can't get something fashioned for consideration in moving forward with a recommendation to the Revenue Interim Committee. Is that good?
Yep, I will take a look and see if we can come up with something that will work.
Thank you. Okay, any further discussion amongst committee members? Anybody online, Mr. Billman?
Not seeing any, no, Madam
Good,
Chair.
thank you.
I
Do
just
we
had
have
one-
any? Oh, yeah.
Question, Madam Chair, about the report to Rick from this committee. Would you like department staff to prepare a summary? Is that something that you'll appoint one of the members of this committee to report to the Revenue Interim Committee, or how would you like to proceed with that?
If it's agreeable to the department and to the other committee members, I would very much like to request that department staff provide that report, present that report to the Revenue Interim Committee. Just let us know who's going to be the face of that, Ms. Rude. Thank you. Okay. Do we have any public comment at this time? Seeing none. Okay. Now, do we have any additional advisory committee discussion on topics discussed here today, or anything that we'll want to get in the works for considering in the future?
That's just for planning is a May, June timeframe. Seem reasonable to everyone for kind of just planning on a annual meeting going forward so that you can kind of have that tentatively penciled into people's calendars. I think that works well for the department, at least in the reappraisal, or going into reappraisal years, because that gives us time to do the updated stumpage calculations and prepare all the documentation, but still have time to make any recommended changes that the committee might have before we have to start implementing that. So if that, I guess, works well for the committee, maybe we'll just kind of plan on an ongoing basis, kind of the early June as being the annual meeting timeframe, if that works for everyone.
Mr. Kotz, I would like to just maybe move that up by a month, because we're always going to be coming up against that deadline with the Revenue Interim Committee on getting their final duties for the interim taken care of. So maybe if we can do May, that might just provide a little bit more wiggle room.
Okay, early May it is.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments?
Madam Chair, Julia online put a comment, said, thanks for the great discussion. Sorry, my microphone is not working. Thanks for reaching out to Gordy and Paul before formalizing agenda items. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Billman, and thank you, Julia. Do we have any other discussion? Okay, and one last call for public comment. Anybody in the room? And anybody online? Up. Okay, online?
No, ma'am, nobody online.
Thank you. Well, I think I would like to reiterate Senator Cuff's comments earlier in thanking the department staff for the great load that they've taken on to get us to move forward on these issues. This is a resource industry for the state of Montana, and we want to do our part in making sure that we keep it as healthy as possible, as viable as possible, and as fair as possible So thank you everyone for participating. Anybody else? And I would like to ask the department staff to let us know if there are any additional items brought forward from our industry leaders ahead of next month's meetings with the Revenue Interim Committee. Other than that, thank you everybody for your participation today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.